is having a similar sense of humor important in a relationship?
I think it's so important because that is the key, like having the same sense of humor. Because if your partner, like I make death jokes, a lot of people don't find funny.
They're a little morbid. They're a little macabre. Your death jokes are morbid because by definition, it has to be morbid if it's a death joke.
And like, I don't make those jokes those jokes don't land well with anyone.
No, not with, you mean with everyone?
With everyone, so yeah.
They land with me most of the time. Sometimes they're like, that one didn't land, but that's okay.
Yeah, and even when I make them myself, I'm like, ooh, Sarah, like, don't think like that.
You've made some pretty bad jokes. You've made jokes that I definitely will never repeat. I don't want anyone to know you've made some pretty bad jokes.
Yeah, so sometimes when I make
And sometimes they're funny, and that makes everyone feel even more uncomfortable because you're like, I don't want to be laughing at what you just said.
And that's the thing, is like, if I was making those jokes all the time and you found them like offensive and you're my partner, that means like I'm okay. Like, first of all, like, I just want to say, like, I'm really okay not making offensive jokes. Like, if a joke is going to offend someone else, like, I don't need to make it, and that's my rule. If a word is going to be offensive to someone else, I don't need to use that word. There's so many words I can use. There's so many other jokes I can make. So I don't do that. But if I had to censor myself with you, is like, that would.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important. I think that's really key. It's something that I recognize was so important when we got together. Is I made a joke, and it really wasn't a terribly it was maybe an off-color joke, and you laughed, and we both kind of acknowledged that that's not a good joke. But there was no shaming around it. And I think that particularly in like this time right now where we're finding this balance between like cancel culture and then also respecting other people's viewpoints. And that's a challenging place to be sometimes, right? It's like sometimes an off-color joke has a place. It's like, it's got to be okay. We also have to find out where the limits are. What joke is a little too far? Some jokes are too far for some people, not for others, even within a particular community or whatever, right? So being able to be like, I got to test my boundaries. And it's one thing when we got together, I remember making a joke and you're like, that one was too far. But it was too far, but you did not hold that against me. I was like, oh, thank you for telling me that was too far. And now I get to kind of like say, all right, but if I don't test that out with you, then who do I test it out with? Nobody, right?
Yeah, and that is so important. And that's why it's like, even with like in relationship, like I think that needs to be is like, you gotta be able to make the jokes that you think are funny with your partner. And then you can talk about it. And that's why I also, I'm extending the same rule to my friends. If a friend says something that I don't like, I can tell them that I didn't like it. Or if I say something that they didn't like they can come back to me and say, Sarah, like maybe that joke you made, like wasn't like, I didn't find that funny because my experience of death is not similar to yours.
But you also made a domestic violence joke once when we walked, with someone that was close to you. And she was just like, very much like, that was too much. And it was like this moment of just kind of like, could have been really awkward, but it was like your family member who you also feel so comfortable with that you're like, oh, okay, I got to check that. That was definitely not appropriate, but you were in a container where you're like, oh, and I feel like one reason why people can get really kind of tense with other people around humor is that you could have been like wanting to defend that. And someone could have been she could have been wanting to like prove a point with it. And instead it was like, oh, you know what? There's no shame for making a mistake. And that becomes okay. And I think that in a relationship is vital. Now, the other part of that you can maybe speak to is when like I make a joke that's too far or you make a joke that's too far. How do we say if you're like, no, I think that's fine. And I'm like, no, that makes me really uncomfortable. Where do we begin to find that balance? Or is that what you're talking about? Why it's so important to share a similar sense of humor?
I think the balance comes also with the person who is making the joke being okay not to make the jokes. Some people really feel entitled to their jokes and their sense of humor, and I just don't feel like that. Like my thing is like if I make a joke and someone says it's that, you crossed the line, my response is like, I'm sorry, I crossed the line. Like, I want to hear what from their perspective why I crossed the line, and I don't need to make that joke. And that's like, I think that's the line. Is like some people are like, you can't censor me, you can't censor me, but it's like it's not censoring. Like if it's offensive, don't say it. It's like,
and it's censoring within also within a community. Like I'm going to be sensitive to things that other people won't be sensitive to. And I think around humor too is that good humor actually exposes some part of our blind spots,
Yeah, because the jokes that I've made that have closed the line, it's like actually something that I need to be educated on.
Right.
And I need to learn more of that, So it's really good when someone says like, you crossed the line, and then you take a step back and say, I'm really sorry. Like if the response is like, I'm really sorry, not defending why you crossed the line, is like, now they can be able to tell you, like you open that space where it's like, why did I cross the line?
Yeah.